So I'm hitting record. It's 8th of May 2020, New Zealand. Paul Cohen here, introducing my Zoom in Touch wisdom talks that I've been exploring and calling on people, friends and people that I know around the world who've got certain skills that can support us in different times, particularly around this COVID-19 lockdown and the change in energies that seem to be happening as we start to move now towards maybe going out into the world again and what to expect. And I've called on Rangers meeting, really pleased to have Theresa Silow with us here from California. I met Theresa last year at the Embodied Immersion course in the US and had a lovely connection with her. And so she was on the top of my list of people to call on. Do you want to say who you are and the things that you're interested in at the moment and your qualifications? Because you've got so many of them too. So welcome, Theresa. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for having me. And I am just amazed when we think about, we met last October and the world has completely changed since then.
Incredible.
I mean, it's extraordinary on so many different levels. Yeah. So, but I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate, it's almost like necessity is the mother of invention, right? So here we are all of a sudden in a situation where we cannot go out or hardly go out, have to be very prudent how many people we meet with and so on and so forth. And here we are meeting via Zoom across the globe, which is great. Yeah. And as far as my my hats that I wear professionally, I am mostly, my main work is really as a professor of somatic psychology. I am teaching at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. And our program is a master's program in somatic psychology, meaning our students are becoming therapists working somatically. So that's sort of my overall, my main job. And I have also a private practice in the area that I live. I live about an hour north of San Francisco in Santa Rosa, and I have a private practice as a somatic psychotherapist. And I also do trauma work. So that's the smaller part of my professional life right now, but it is part of it and it feels essential, so that I'm not just teaching from memory, but that I'm teaching actually from direct somatic experience.
Fantastic. Awesome. And you're on sabbatical writing a book. Do you want to tell us a bit about that too?
Yes, I am on sabbatical, which has been quite a blessing. I feel on one hand, timing couldn't have been better because I'm literally in lockdown to have to write. There's nowhere to go. And I also I didn't have to scramble like most of my colleagues were all of a sudden midway through the semester, you have to put your classes online. So I've been home writing, and yes, I'm writing about embodiment. My focus is to present embodiment as a developmental process.
Oh, cool.
And what I mean by that is, you know, we go through different stages of our life. We go through different stages of relationship to our body. And I would say most of us at this adult age, we have reached a place where we have a body rather than we are a body. And that actually is a significant development. A lot goes into getting to that place. And yet it's also the place where many of us feel a certain separation, fragmentation, and a feeling of being disconnected from our body. And so what might it look like? Like, my sense is it's an important development to get to this place, at least from a Western development. And yet, what does it look like? Are there stages as we turn more fully towards embodiment? You know, oftentimes we sort of have to go through encountering the patterns in us that have established themselves through our development, through our history. And we also get to places where we recognize that there are maybe more natural states of aliveness, of substantialness, of depth, of whatever in our sensate experience. And so I'm trying to pull the bigger picture together in my writing. And I also, with that, I'm wanting to put embodiment front and center. Because most developmental theories are psychologically oriented. And even though I think that's an important place to start with, but what I'm saying is psychology always has a sensory ground.
Yes.
And so
yeah.
Sort of the
can you just briefly describe what embody means?
Well, there are so many different ways of looking at it. Embodiment most of the time means that you're actually aware of your body. But there are different levels of awareness. And so that's why I'm saying in my trying to clarify, I realize that there are different relationships that we as an identity have with our embodied experience. So in a way, if I want to give you the elevator speech, my sense is our sense of self arises out of the body, and eventually sense of self also has to be relinquished back into the body. So it's like a whole arc of development. So that's sort of the speculations that I'm taking on, and of course using some Western psychology, developmental psychology, but also quite a bit of Eastern traditions. So I'm trying to integrate, but really the main thread being embodiment.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've been in isolation because of your writing of your book. Have you been much in contact with the outside world? And because I know that you're in different part of lockdown to us. Are you seeing some kind of trend of people's emotions and how that's moved, or are you have you been too engrossed in your own focus to see that? I'm sure you've seen some of it.
I've seen some of it, and I also, I always also take myself as a case study, meaning how do my friends, how reading about news and media, how do we respond to crisis?
Yes.
To me, that's a big question, because obviously all of a sudden we're forced upon a certain condition, which is to stay put. So a lot of distractions of life are just not possible anymore.
No.
And that's quite a huge shift.
Yes.
So there's we can say a certain level of agency has been taken away.
Yes.
And that's confrontive. And so what I'm curious about, and actually let me say first, I feel like I am aware of the privilege that I have in this journey. I am in a safe home. I'm even close enough to nature that I can build in a morning run every day before I go into writing. And I think it's become apparent, I'm sure it's similar in your country, but in the US, it's been very clear that the people who suffer most during this crisis are people who have less privilege and less resources.
Yeah.
So I feel like it needs to be noted because there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And so I think how we deal or how we're able to deal with this crisis really also depends on what resources we have available.
Yes. Yeah.
At the same time, so looking at myself and looking at the people who are close to me, I always feel every crisis has an opportunity. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it has an opportunity. And so what is the opportunity here? And I get some of it also the feedback through my clients because I continue seeing clients via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I have some clients who say, this is heaven for me, because they tend to be introvert.
Yeah.
They tend to, social engagement is a little more challenging. And one of my clients, she said, I finally feel like the world knows what my life is like.
Interesting.
So in her experience, the world came in to her lifestyle.
Mm.
But that's also, then there's the opposite, where people are very, they feel very curtailed by the limitations because they're more socially oriented, they're more relational. So what comes up for us in this crisis will be different depending on what our default is.
Yeah.
And so I was looking at it somatically, and I feel like on a somatic level, we tend to, or let me say, on a very basic somatic foundational level, we have two basic behaviors. We have the behavior of moving towards,
Yeah.
or the behavior of moving away.
Yeah.
And we see those polarities at different levels of our organism, like I'm thinking of cells. They can open or close. And both of these movements are necessary for their health. If they're just opening, they're going to be flooded. If the membranes are just closing, they're going to be starved. And yet, my observation is we tend to live on towards one end or the other of that spectrum. So some of us, we live in the moving backwards, and some of us, we live in the moving forward. And so I feel just the very observation of where am I in that spectrum? Where am I in that trajectory? What's my go? And what does it allow and what does it not allow?
Mm-hmm.
Feels like a really important inquiry.
Yeah.
And so I've been looking at that. And I actually, if you feel like it would be appropriate, I would love to offer a very basic and very simple exploration that would maybe help to support that inquiry. Where am I in this? Am I somebody moving towards, or am I somebody moving away?
Perfect.
Yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So let me just start by just sort of sitting in a comfortable way on your chair. And I would encourage you to not lean backwards, but to sit so that you're neutrally aligned through the middle of your body. And then let me in order, I want to help you distinguish something, but let's do a brief, just sort of tracing ourselves. Use your hands and start at the crown of your head and just trace yourself laterally. So trace your head, your neck, trace along your shoulders, and then come back down along your ribs, all the way down to your hips. So we're establishing a dividing line here. And let's do it one more time. And I wanna invite you, as we do this, just be aware that everything in front of this line that we're tracing, in this exploration, we're gonna call the front body. And everything behind this line, we're gonna call the back body. So starting again, tracing from the top of your head, just tracing down laterally, head, neck, shoulders, and then switching to your ribs, and all the way down to your hip joints. And then just take a few moments to let that distinction settle in your awareness, that there is a front in front of that line, and there's a back in back of that line. And then I want to offer an experiment. And the experiment is we want to lean into both. So how about just allowing yourself to slightly lean forward into the front body, which also means the tissue in your front body is just going to condense a little. You're doing like a very minor flexion forward. So just let the tissue in your body condense in your front. Stay there for a little bit. And then let the tissue in the front body expand again to come back to neutral. And then we want to explore the same thing in our back. So here we are, shifting our awareness into our back body. And let the tissue in your back condense itself slightly. You're going into a little bit of an extension. And just stay there for a moment. And then allow the tissue to expand again and come back to neutral. And here is my inquiry. As we're going to go back into the front body and then in the back body, we want to pause to see which place is more familiar to us. So just move forward again, leaning into the front body. It's like you're forwardly oriented, you're ready to go, you're leaning in. And just notice how familiar or unfamiliar this place is. And then slowly come back to neutral. Just let that settle. And then the invitation is to slightly lean into your back body. Slightly behind your vertical neutral axis. Leaning away. And again, just notice how familiar is that? Is that a place you know? Or is it a place that you're quite unfamiliar with? And then just come back into neutral. And so this simple exercise, to me, can sort of provide a somatic ground for a beautiful inquiry. And the inquiry for me is, in this time of lockdown, or here in the US we call it shelter in place, what did I lean into? And what did I lean out of? And that will be the answer, of course, will be so individual. The other question is leaning in or leaning out your default? And what would it take to go to the less familiar, to expand the repertoire? And I think coming back to this notion that any crisis is also an opportunity. Like the question is, what do I learn about myself in those circumstances? What comes up? How do I navigate? And do I navigate by leaning in? Or do I navigate by leaning out? Or when do I move to one or the other? It feels very useful to know what our go-to place is, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's also good to know what the other end of the spectrum feels like. because the more we allow that to come in, we have more choices. Anything you want to say? What comes up for you?
It's lovely. I mean, often when we do center, left, right, we don't often have a forward back experience, which was very quite yummy. And I've been exploring this in my own yoga in a very, very similar way, where we look at being expansive, but looking also at being contained, so that, and recognizing a similar thing, that we do have our default pattern. So, you know, when people go around being open-hearted, not a good place to be when you don't want to be open-hearted. So it's looking at the versatility of that and have that expression in your body. And we've also done a lot of exploration of breathing into the rib cage at the back, and having that as a important place of focus in terms of lung movement, in terms of versatility of your rib cage, but also the emotions associated in Chinese medicine, which is grief. So in Chinese medicine, lungs related to grief. And so having that relationship. So it's, but beautiful. I love, it's a really, really lovely exercise just to look at what our predominance is. And certainly for my own experience, that retreating back was a bit more burdensome. I felt it a bit more like my forward movement, just there was all these different places of possibilities, and that backward was like, it was like that heavy weight on your shoulders, you know. It was like there's just so much assimilation to be going on. That was my back experience. And I'm sure people would have everyone's going to have very different relationships with front and back.
And it's also, you know, it's actually like when I do work with people, whether it's clients or students, at times I just sort of sit there and ask myself, am I in my front body right now, or am I in my back body?
Okay.
And just moving back and forth, like, how does the situation feel different?
Yes. Shifting
into the other one. And again, it's not that one is better than the other, but it's like, do I have the choice?
So let's say that we're having this client practitioner relationship, and you're doing your forward back, feeling where you're somatically in relationship with me, in a sense. Is that what you're saying? That's your embodied relationship with me. What does it inform you when you're at the front, as opposed, for your experience, as opposed to the back? I'm curious.
Well, it usually, it can be, it doesn't always have to be, but it can be a hint of where my student or my client is. Because there is something called an interrelational field.
Right.
And so my body gets impacted by your body and vice versa. So, but it also precludes that that I, as somebody working with it, that I do know my tendency. For instance, my tendency is more in my back body. So it's good to know that before I then see, okay, what comes up here as I'm sitting with somebody, or even as I'm teaching a whole class. Yeah, but there's an information to be gotten by paying attention to this. There's a lot one could say about that, because it also relates a little bit to very, very early distinctions, going back to the event that we met, like Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen talks about the front and the back as the earliest differentiation that an organism, a human organism, develops. So there are many different layers to this, but if I want to use it, it's good to know what my tendency is, and then to simply be curious. I'm wondering what this is about. I'm actually leaning much more forward than I usually do.
Yeah.
So what's happening here?
Yeah. So you have to understand your body, your embodiment of your own history and how you relate. So then when you're with your client, when you feel some different things happening in your body, that's more in relationship to you and your client as a point of curiosity, as you say.
Yeah.
So if
And
I'm,
that,
yeah, sorry.
yeah, and that's how I like to hold it, because it needs to be a curiosity rather than a fact.
Yes, nice.
You never.
Yeah, I love curiosity. Yeah. So if I'm at home and I'm kind of going, oh, that was really cool what I picked up, because it's really lovely exercise, but I don't have the privilege of working with you. How am I going to navigate my frontal and my posterior, my anterior and posterior experience?
That's a good question. I think it's probably also a good question as we're easing up on lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Like letting the inquiry sort of work you a little. Where is my go-to place? And I think you've said a little bit maybe. What is it like to go into the less familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And then in a way, the privilege of this lockdown is that we're not very distracted, and we actually have a lot more capacity to pay attention to those subtle differences.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go out, can I maintain that curiosity? Where am I right now? Even just standing in the checkout line with our masks and trying to buy groceries. Am I in my back? Is it that I really need to retreat, or am I actually forward? Yeah. So the question, the inquiry actually can happen anywhere, and it can give us information of how we navigate different spaces. Do we lean in or do we lean out?
So if I'm kind of, I'm just trying to think of a scenario. So if I'm leaning in a lot, somewhere along the line, it's good to lean back and have that experience of leaning back. Do we find a place in between? So, because I'm neither front nor back, I'm both, aren't I, really? And so is there, do we find a place where we can reside, which is neither front nor back, or do we find a place where we can reside comfortably in the back if that's not your default place of comfort? Or I suppose all of those really, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's true that eventually there is actually something developing in between those two layers.
Yeah.
And that's a very important part of ourself, thinking of it embryologically. Once these two layers have established, then actually what comes in is our midline, which is our core. So that's a very significant step, I think, for what we're talking about right now, is to just explore the difference between the front and the back.
Yes.
And to explore our tendencies. And then as another option, what is it like to be in this neutral place where we're just more in our own middle rather than backwards or forward.
Yeah.
But we do need all of it.
Yes. Yeah. I like that. Well, I do like that. I'm already kind of designing my yoga class tomorrow around this, because it's
great.
I love hearing people like you talk that have got such and I'd say a beautiful embodiment of your work and understanding and appreciation, because I just get excited and spin off from it. So one of the explorations that we've been doing that is an important part of my own practice is standing so that you go off center and back again. You know, the simple thing that we've all explored. But for me, probably one of the most important things that I do is having that sense of going off balance both ways and finding a place where I can be upright, but without the muscular tension. So I'm really, really present, and keep letting go of unnecessary musculature to keep me upright. So
Right.
coming back to that center, but I love the exploration rather than just going forward and back, that this is my outgoing and my retreating, and look at it in relationship to going out into the wider world and suddenly being in a place that's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to be the same again, the world outside.
It's never going to be the same. We don't know what it's going to be like.
No.
Yeah. And there is something about these, you know, moving forward in a way, again, I'm taking us back to these very early stages. It's in the front that we receive the nourishment. And it is in the back that we receive protection. And both of them are very necessary ingredients. So we want to lean in at times and we want to lean back at times because we need all of it. And we're a dynamic event. We're not just these centered beings who are just living in their neutral core. Life would be boring, right? We're engaging, and how we engage from the front, from the back, is part of our makeup.
Nice. I like that. I'm going to do lots of exploration front and back. Why the back more protective?
It's really going back to embryological processes.
Okay.
Because the back initially is more connected to the uterine wall, but then it's also, that's where the amniotic fluid, it comes over from the back. The front is where we develop the connection to our mother through the umbilical cord.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's a lovely image for me.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And really, Paul, what it means is we have those principles
Yes.
within us from the get-go.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I love the embryology. You know, I was booked up to do Bonnie's course a couple of weeks ago, so I would have been in America. So I booked.
Oh, really? I was going to be there.
Oh, well, no. But we meet here. Oh, wow. That's that is a real shame. I do hope the world changes so that we can relive that together. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So you know, there's that saying that a butterfly flapping its wings in California changes the weather patterns in China. You know, and it has to be true, because it has to be true. And never before as maybe during the different wars that we've had this kind of global energy, this global emotion that's happening, you know, and I know that we all do it differently, but there are and that we're in the same ocean but we're in different boats, but there's been a huge amount do you feel that the last 4 or 5 weeks has been more that grief thing? Are we coming into a different movement forwards? Is it going to be more? So in Chinese medicine, so it's quite interesting. In Chinese medicine, the time of, we're in autumn here in New Zealand, so we're retreating. This is like we've had summer, we've had late summer, we've taken all the fruits off the trees and we've harvested, and then so we came into a stage when we were isolated in line with our season. So it's been quite interesting. Now we're heading into winter, which is more retreating. In Chinese medicine, this is related more to kidneys and bladder, more to fear, the emotions around fear. But you're the kind of opposite end of that spectrum. So you're in spring, but you've been wound up in spring, so you almost can't start planting your seeds. And then it's going to unravel when you're going to come into late spring or middle of spring, ready for, but you might have to start retreating back again because we don't know what the world is out there. So It's kind of, it feels very energetically quite confusing for us because it's not following the patterns of nature.
And in a way, I would think that is what transitions are. Transitions are where the known patterns are no longer working.
Yes.
So, and transitions usually mean there is an exceeding level of turbulence.
Yes.
Because something new is shaping itself and we don't know what it will look like.
No.
What I do know is the best way to support whatever is happening right now is by paying attention, because that's how we're going to get clues to how can we participate, what wants to shape itself. That's how we can know when to lean in and when to lean out,
Yeah.
and what to lean into and what to lean out from.
Yeah.
But what it exactly is, we won't know. We have to just live it.
No, it's about having more versatility, isn't it, as well? So we've been exploring movement of our rib cage, knowing that that versatility is also going to support.
Yeah. And the other piece I want to say, I don't know if you have a similar experience. I do feel, you know, my country of origin is Germany.
Yes.
So I am in touch with my siblings, and we're dealing with exactly the same thing. The virus that has spread across the globe. I mean, that's quite something, that everybody on this planet is dealing with the same issue.
Amazing.
It's amazing. And it's, at least for me, in a strange sort of way, it's really also connecting.
Totally.
Yeah. There are no borders.
No, totally. And for me, I've connected massively with people that I wouldn't. I've had people come into my yoga classes from the UK, Switzerland, Canada, Mexico, that wouldn't have happened. So there is that whole thing of connection. My nephew has just arrived back in the UK from working in the Amazon. And so he works with tribes in the Amazon and looks at, I'm not quite sure what study he's doing at the moment. He was studying the food sources of Amazonian tribes. And he's just come back, and it's devastating, apparently, the people in the Brazilian, the tribal people, plus the fact that they're coming into rainy season so that they don't have the abundance of fish that they can get. But apparently it's just crazy. And so it appears like it's affected, you know, every corner of the world, and we're all, as you say, in that together.
And I think that extent has never been there before, even during world wars, you know, because even the connectivity through internet has increased our communication to such an extent that you and I can have a conversation here and even see each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. You know, when we were children, I was part of the fastest communication network in the world when I was about 16. I delivered telegrams on a little motorbike around. So you know, you're a child, because people didn't have, no one had phones in those days. Not everyone had a phone. So if you had a grandchild born, the quickest way they contacted the telegram office, and I went and delivered a telegram. It's crazy.
I know, and nowadays it's all instantaneous.
And to see you across the world as well. I'll tell you one of the other things that I keep coming back to and working in, and the focus of the engagement principles that I use with the bone yoga that I'm teaching and exploring, is kindness. Mm-hmm. For us to work with kindness, because we keep, and I'm aware that I do that too, and I've you know, we've had our challenges, that's for sure, in the lockdown, and I've found myself beating myself up and like having this argument in my head or not liking something, and I remember just going up and sitting down, looking out over the view, and I said, what am I doing? Why don't you have a relationship with your emotional stuff in the same kind way that you engaged your yoga? And then I started to engage it smoothly and with kindness. And that whole head thing that I was kind of doing, just slowly, and it was really revealing that I was kind of, you know, I was walking my talk in my yoga in terms of my emotional pattern that I found myself in. And it was quite freeing for me at that moment.
You know, in my mind, that is part of the butterfly effect.
Yes.
If you can
totally.
find the kindness for yourself or for somebody else,
Yeah,
it goes a long way.
absolutely. I'll keep having these kind of big thoughts about how I can do something to save the world, you know, because I want it saved. You know, if we could change things politically, or if we could do something, and I just keep coming back to, and I know it's obvious really, but change has to come from within. You know, we all talk about that, and that butterfly effect for me of just, I can't change the world, you know, I might like to, but I can change something going on inside of me, and I can look at how I can support that understanding to be with the people I'm around and close to me. So it's all about being a bit closer together in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, being connecting in a different way.
Connecting in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you would like to share, your little gems of wisdom? I know you've got like encyclopedias probably full of them, and we could just talk endlessly, but anything else, or you think that's just keep
I
embodying
think
that front back?
the only thing that might be, I feel like in these challenging moments, there are always going to be times where we're pushed to the edge.
Yeah.
And can we trust? Can we trust that things go on? Can we trust that even in difficult times, there is on one level some form of benevolence?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. There's always a bit of hope. You know, part of me doesn't feel very hopeful with the world, the way it's going in some ways, but I'm also really hopeful, and I hold on to that, and I work with that, and see where it goes. Who knows? Yeah.
I think for me, the best thing is to recognize that I don't know.
Fantastic. Me too. Yeah. Yeah.
And we
And
do
I
the
really don't know. And I get that same thing when I you know, I've worked with you know, in therapy with people since 1985, and then I come upon people like you with your experience, and with Bonnie, and there's a whole new world opening up, and I really know that I don't know much, and the more I know, I still don't know much. I know it's a cliche, but it's really apparent, and that makes it really exciting that there's so many still possibilities out there regardless. And we've spoken about this too during the wartime, you know, with my
Yes, I remember.
my grandmother, and you know, the versatility that they had to have, being, you know, forced by Hitler to stand in the Plaza Square listening to Hitler rant and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the versatility that they must have had as well of somehow working through that. And I suppose in some ways it's not too dissimilar, but obviously very different. What a
Yeah.
world, eh?
It's also interesting that you and I are here right now.
I know. Again,
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
quite
it,
something.
because we had a very special connection, particularly at the end of the Immersion last year, which I do appreciate those few minutes that we did have together.
Yeah, me.
And here too, I really appreciate. Thank you so much for making the time. I know
You're
you're
very
really busy
welcome.
in your creativity, and I'm resonating with all that you say in a real yummy way. And I hope that when people do look at this, regardless of where we are in the world, that this front-back relationship can support us. Doesn't matter what we're doing, whether we're in a crisis or whether we're in a lovely situation. We can still learn from our tendencies.
Right.
Our tendencies.
And we always will need nourishment and protection.
We will. Awesome. Absolutely. Well, a fantastic way to end. So what I will do is just say thank you so much. I will stop recording, and we can hang around just for a couple of minutes. But I'd like to say thank you so much, and maybe, you know, further on down the line we can get together again, and we can see where the world's going, and see what skills you want to offer us, if you'd like to come back one day.
Yeah, now that we've experimented this way,
Yes.
Who knows? I'm certainly open.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Theresa.
Thank you, Paul.